Whenever there's a tragedy, whether it's a natural disaster or a mass killing or whatever it might be, we see people extending their thoughts and prayers to the victims affected. Now, in recent years, I've noticed that people are starting to get more and more tired of hearing this phrase, thoughts and prayers. In fact, a couple years ago, there was a newspaper cover that looked like this. But is that true? Is the time of saying thoughts and prayers over? Is it time for us to think about how we can act? Are thoughts and prayers enough? Well, let's talk about it. What's up everybody, Chase here, and if this is your first time watching one of these videos, make sure you start by hitting that subscribe button. I post a new video like this every single Thursday. And so the question I want to answer today is, when it comes to our response in the midst of a tragedy, are thoughts and prayers enough? Well, a few things need to be clarified before we can continue this conversation at all. First, if you don't believe in God, then of course thoughts and prayers are not going to be enough. So I don't want this to turn into a discussion of does God exist? There's another time and another conversation for that. If you don't believe in God, then we're starting on two different platforms and there's no way we're going to reach the same conclusion anyway. Second of all, if you don't believe that God is a God who we can communicate with, then there's no way we're going to arrive at the same place either. So you know, a lot of people believe that God just, created the world, if there even is a God, and things are just running on their own. He doesn't really have any influence or any say in what's going on. If that's the view that you hold, then we need to have another conversation first, because of course thoughts and prayers are not going to be enough. And then finally, we need to define what we're talking about when we say thoughts and prayers. Because a lot of people just use the term thoughts and prayers, they're just trying to be empathetic or just trying to acknowledge that a situation is bad and give their respect to the victims and those who are affected. And there's a time for that, but that's not what I'm really talking about. In fact, I don't even want to focus on the thoughts aspect of this thing. I'm talking specifically about praying. Is prayer the right response that we should have in the midst of a tragedy, or is that not enough? Well, prayer is way more than just thinking about something or acknowledging something. Prayer is direct communication between us and the creator of the universe. In the midst of times of uncertainty and when we see the brokenness of this world, our first instinct should be to pray. To think that we don't even need to communicate to God and to pray to God at all is actually a form of idolatry. Because we're putting ourselves before God. We're saying, we don't need God. We got this. We can solve this. In fact, God needs us to take care of the problem. That's a sign of idolatry. I love what the psalmist says in Psalm 10 verse 4, I think it is, where he says, "In his pride the wicked man does not seek him. In his thoughts there's no room for God." So if we have the correct biblical view that God is a God who wants to communicate with us and wants us to communicate with him, then to say that thoughts and prayers are not enough at its very basic level is either a complete misunderstanding of what prayer is, or it's just idolatry, thinking that we can solve the problem without God. Now, that being said, to say that we can't have thoughts and prayers and act on a certain situation is a false dichotomy. See, the book of James tells us to be doers of the word, not just to hear the word. So we don't just sit back and listen and say, all right, well, I'm just gonna think about this and not act at all. But what a lot of people don't understand is that prayer is actually an act as well. It forces us to rely on God. It forces us to realize that we're in a situation that we have no control over, that we can't fix the brokenness of this world, but we serve a God who can. So to answer the question, are thoughts and prayers enough? Well, thoughts on their own are not enough, but is prayer enough? Yes. But what we have to understand is that prayer is not in contrast to action. Corrie Ten Boom, who was a Dutch, I think she was Dutch, a Dutch watchmaker who helped protect the Jewish people during the time of the Nazis. And one of the quotes that she said, and I love this quote, is she said, "Is prayer your steering wheel or is it your spare tire?" Are we using prayer as sort of an emergency raft boat? Like, oh, we've tried everything else, nothing's working, we need to pray. Or are we starting with prayer? Are we steering our lives with prayer? Are we realizing that we're not actually the ones that are steering it anyway? God's the one that's running the show. Are we starting with prayer and then going from there? One final thought is that when we're praying, we should pray expecting to hear from God, and we should pray with open hearts, because maybe God wants to send you, maybe God wants to send me to these places that are hurting to help and to volunteer. I don't know. But the only way that we're gonna figure out what God wants us to do in a particular situation is to pray. But next time there's a tragedy, and unfortunately it's a when, not an if, our first instinct has got to be to call out to the God who created this world, the God who's the only one who can fix the brokenness. And we go from there. I hope this video helped bring some clarity to what people should be meaning when they say thoughts and prayers. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, join the family. I post a new video like this every Thursday, and as always, I'll see you on another video.